Welcome to Behendigkeit podcast number 9. My name is Gereon and I'm with.
Hi, my name is Pauline and I'm happy to be back.
Awesome. All right, today we are going to talk actually about a TikTok, about a meme that's been going around for quite some time, and it's called the 13 Rules of a Gunfight. And then it sometimes varies. Sometimes it's called the 13 Rules of a Gunfight by the US Marine Corps or the US Army and so on. And it's actually not a real set of rules. It's something like basically a meme that's been put together by people to be kind of funny, but also have a kernel of truth to it. And some of them are actually quotes from General Mattis, who is a quite famous general and who has written a book. And I want to go through them today because there's actually something interesting to take out of them. And so as we go through them, keep in mind this is not an official rule set, but these are kind of like little rules that can be helpful. And we're going to go through them and think about how they can be applied to other areas of life. Because what's really interesting to me is that Miyamoto Musashi, who was the most famous samurai swordsman and who is like a very, very enlightened being. So first of all, he was the best samurai of his time. He killed everyone that challenged him, and usually in a very short amount of time. But he was also a philosopher. And he said something really interesting. And he said, if you know the way, and the way refers to how things are, it's the way as in Taoism, it's the way as in Do. If you think about Judo, about the dojo, for example, right? The way, like a mythical, special path among many paths. If you know the way, you'll see it in all things. So what he's saying is, if you have learned to recognize some path, some truth, and he discovered it in his martial arts, you can then go on to apply it to other fields. And this is actually something that I see quite often, that people who have attained mastery in some field, and it might be anything, it might be music, it might be architecture, whatever, once they've reached a certain level, usually some master level, they are able to apply it to different fields because usually they have a lot of things in common. And so what I would like to do today is talk about these rules. They're very, very much military, right? So it's about shooting, it's about taking cover. And so when I want to talk about if there's not something that we can pull out for business life or general life. So the first one is be courteous to everyone, friendly to no one. And this is one I'm struggling a little bit with, because just before this podcast, we've been talking about, like, right, you said, well, I always try to be very nice to people, say hi, greet them. This is how you were raised. And I actually noticed that about you before. And I think I do the same, right? So if we're at a restaurant with a team, the waiter comes, there's always going to be two people that always thank the people all the time. And that's going to be you and me, right?
Yeah.
And so I actually like being friendly to people. And I do have some contact with people that are in special operations or that are former operations. And this is one I always notice with them. They're not unfriendly. They're not crass or like mean to people, but they're almost never friendly, which is kind of funny and kind of strange. But they are always courteous, right? They always say thank you. They always say please. But it's not in the same way that you do it, for example. It's always like a little bit more reserved. And maybe it's not felt, it's not heartfelt. And so I've always been noticing this, and it's always been kind of strange to me. And I wonder what the reason could be for something like that. Do you have an idea, like why somebody would not try to be friendly but still be polite and courteous?
I think it depends a little bit of the situation or also on the relationship between those two people. I think being polite has a lot to do with some manners you raised with or whatever. And it's always good to be polite and have those manners. But on the other hand, I think a big part of it is also like a little personal distance. Because like you said, I'm really friendly and I think I give the most people a good feeling or like a welcome feeling, but sometimes it's really on a personal base. So if I think about myself talking to people in higher positions. I'm always super friendly, whatever, but I do not really make a difference between the friendliness between business relationships, or not on a like, in a different kind of way, but I'm always friendly. But I think some people have in mind that this is, for example, like a work relationship, and there's a difference between friendliness or politeness with with their friends. For example, maybe the people are completely different when they talk to family members or friends, whatever. But I think me, it's more like I see the people as human. Doesn't matter in which positions they are, or what they're working, what title they have. I try to be always polite and super friendly, because this is also a way I wanted to be treated.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. And I was also thinking that, maybe it's a matter of which industry you're in, right? Because if you're in special operations, your business is in the end to kill people if necessary, right? And so you might encounter a lot of people that you might need to inflict violence on later on. And so one thing I sometimes notice, it doesn't happen very often, but sometimes my friendliness is taken as weakness. Some people are just like a little bit rougher and they want to look for trouble. And then if I'm too friendly, then they take it as a sign that maybe they can push me around. And so being more courteous instead of friendly, I think is a good way to keep that distance, right? To first of all signal, oh, he's not just a nice guy that you can start pushing around and then find out, but like find out a little bit earlier. And also it probably makes it a little bit easier if you're not too friendly with people then to switch to like a more violent mode, because you don't, maybe it's something about your own mind, right? If you have, like, for example, you treat your child friendly, loving, and then you treat a stranger a little bit more distant, right? It still says courteous, so it's still polite. Maybe that's actually a good idea, because why would you treat everyone basically the same, especially if maybe you're going to be in conflict, and that could be a violent conflict, right? Or also in business. So I notice it there as well that especially very successful entrepreneurs, financiers, and so on, they're always very courteous, right? But they also know that some kind of violence can erupt at any time. It's not going to be physical violence. It's going to be a conflict of interest, right? Different shareholders disagree, and they could be very courteous one moment, and the next moment the knives come out, right? And so staying at this courteous level is maybe actually the better option than like always being friendly, because if you're friends, you're not going to be doing the same stuff that you would do if you were just polite.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so this is a good one, and I like that we talked about it, because I think I have a little bit more clarity on it. So let's go to the second one, and it says, decide to be aggressive enough, quickly enough. And this one, I really like it. This is what I always say, violence of action, right? You don't want to start a fight. You don't want to be aggressive, but if you are, just go crazy. Because if you ever come to the point that you decide you need to be violent, first of all, you should have a good reason, right? Somebody wants to abduct you, somebody wants to do harm to your child, somebody wants to rape you, right? You shouldn't start a fight just because somebody called you a name or something like that, right? So personally, I think your threshold should be very high before you initiate violence. But if it does, there's really no point in taking it slow. You can often see it, right? So two guys, they start to square off, and then they push each other and say, why are you looking like that? Why are you looking like that, right? And you just see the escalatory spiral happening. And so for me, if I can, I'll just remove myself from the situation. So what if he looks tough, right? That's cool. I leave. I look weaker. That's fine, because the thing is, you never know how these things end, right? They can go really wrong. Somebody pulls a knife. You punch the other person out and they hit their head on the curb, right? And they are going to be in a wheelchair for the rest of their lives, and you're going to have to pay for them. So violence is actually super, super dangerous beyond getting your ass kicked. But if I cannot do that, and the situation really calls for violence, I'm in absolute favor of maximizing the violence, of going crazy. Because if you are in that situation, it doesn't pay to start slowly, because you're just going to invite a longer fight. You're just gonna create more risk. So if you have to do it, just go crazy. Any thoughts on this?
No, I totally agree. Honestly, like if it takes too much time, if you think about it too long, you already lost.
Yeah, and that's another good point, your own psychology, right? Because everyone who's been, especially I think every guy who's been in that situation, right, the fear starts creeping up on you. And if you don't move, this is especially bad, right? This is why people that are good at this, they'll start moving just to get the adrenaline kind of worked into the system and don't have this build up where you're getting into that frozen stage and you're in trouble and you're like, oh shit, it's getting worse. I'm being frozen in place, and the fear is just getting control of you. So start moving and start going crazy. But on the business side, I think this is really important as well, because what I often see is that people make a decision. So they'll decide to start building a product. They want to research a technology, right? So AI has been growing in impact lately. And then people will say, oh, yeah, this is something we should do, right? But they don't exhibit violence of action. They don't get started. They don't go aggressively in it. They'll say, oh, yeah, this is something that we need to investigate, right? And maybe they put it even on the backlog, but it's like at spot 200 and they're going to get to it in 15 months, right? That's going to be too slow. With some things, I'm not saying with everything, you shouldn't be like starting like a rocket with everything, but with some things, you just got to get started and you got to be violent about it. If you are too slow, it's not going to work. So sometimes you just have to be aggressive, right? And here it says, decide to be aggressive enough, right? It doesn't say, oh, go crazy because you don't have any control over your emotions or your actions, right? It says, decide, use your brain to be aggressive enough, quickly enough. So if you make the decision, go hard. Next one is have a plan. The one after is have a backup plan, because the first one probably won't work.
I mean, that's the reality, no? Like, we all know that.
Yeah.
Everything looks fine in your head and when you plan something, but once you start, there's some problems coming up, whatever, and then you have to figure it out again. So the backup plan is most of the times the more important one.
Yeah. And I think where people get hung up on this planning thing is that, sometimes they understand this and then they come to the conclusion that they shouldn't have a plan because the plan is not going to work anyway, right? And I think that's a major mistake, because the act of planning is very beneficial because it's going to give you orientation. You're going to find out through the planning phase that, oh yeah, I'm missing some information here. We need to find something out first. And so planning is very important. The plan is important as well, but you have to realize that it's probably not going to work and you're going to have to adapt. But the most important thing is not to be a slave to your own plan, right? Do the planning, have a plan, and then when things change, you throw it overboard and you go with backup plan. And maybe even the backup plan, right? Because you always have to adapt to it and don't get stuck in the plan that you made a while ago that you now gotten attached to and that you want to make work even though it doesn't make any sense anymore. The next one kind of connects to the first one. It says, be polite, be professional, but have a plan to kill everyone you meet. And so here we have the politeness again, be professional again, but have a plan to kill everyone you meet. Okay, that's a little bit crass, but I actually understand where they're coming from. So if we put this into a business context, I see that people that play on an elevated level, they do this all the time, right? So let's say you have a startup and you have some investors coming in and, everyone is very polite and courteous. Everyone's getting along because everybody wants to make this startup a success, right? And at some point of time, let's say there are 5 parties who have invested in this startup. At some point of time, the interests are going to diverge, right? Somebody wants to take on more capital and that would mean diluting the shares. And so the others don't want to do it. And now the question is, who do you want to be? Do you want to be the person that's a dreamer, that's unrealistic, that thinks, oh, everything is going to work out? And then find out once the divergence in interest happens that everyone else actually has planned for this and they have inserted some clauses into the contracts and they can actually like take your shares away or water you down or do some other nasty stuff? Or do you actually want to be prepared for that? And I would argue that this actually, it sounds very crass, but it makes a lot of sense because in the end, it says be prepared, right? it's not saying, okay, treat everyone like an enemy all the time, be super paranoid and suspicious of their every move, but be prepared. If shit goes down, you have a plan, you're ready to go. You go back to point 2, and you're not only going to do something with a plan, you're going to be very aggressive about it, right? Because in the end, this is what makes you win. And sometimes I get the feedback that I'm talking too much about military stuff in a business context. But the reason why I do it is because in war, you can't play around, right? It's for real. It's life or death. It's black and white. And so you actually learn some truth there that count when it really matters. And in business, I think there's a lot of space to doodle around, to try something out and not be very real about stuff. And then you can find the truth out as easily as possible. While in war, you will see the results pretty quickly. And so you can decide, do you want to be that person that has a plan, that is ready, and that can go hard? Or do you want to be the person that's super surprised and find out that all the other guys that put money into the startups, well, they actually planned for this, right? They didn't want to do this, but they have planned for this.
I mean, in the end, it doesn't matter if it's a topic of war or if it's business-wise. I think in the end, everything, like, it's clear. Everybody wants to win. Everybody wants to win the deal. Everybody wants to make money or, win the battle or whatever. So first of all, I think everybody's his own best friend. And it doesn't matter, like, of course you should be polite and keep, like, your social manners, whatever, but you always should be a little bit curious what's the motivation of the other people and be aware of what happens behind your back.
But see, this is really interesting because I think we are very different in that regard. I think you are a little bit harder in that sense because I don't necessarily want to always win. Now, of course, in the long run, I want to do well and I want to accomplish my plans. But I'm actually often quite soft in these kind of things. And so for me, it's very helpful to keep that in mind, right? And I guess it really depends on different circumstances as well. However, I think a lot of people, because we are civilized, right? That's a very good thing. But it's also a bad thing because it makes us soft and because it makes us dream up this civilized harmony that isn't really there. And I see this. It's actually funny that I'm saying this about myself because I'm often telling people, you guys don't know what real criminals will do to you, right? So a mentor of mine, he used to be on a parole board in the United States. And he would tell me stuff, and this is really crazy, and people cannot imagine the evil that some people out in the world are capable and very willing to do. And it's not just in ISIS territory somewhere far away, it's everywhere. And of course, you don't need to get paranoid about it, but this fiction that we have created of everything is safe, the democracy is not going to fall, the police is going to come when you call them. They're not always going to come. It's a fiction, right? And you don't need to go become a crazy prepper and like be scared all the time. But I think it's quite helpful to be somewhat prepared. And I think we all, in different contexts, often fall into this trap of letting the fiction become real in our heads.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the next one is a little bit funny. Do not attend a gunfight with a handgun whose caliber does not start with a 4. Okay. Let's skip that one. But the next one is very nice. And it says, anything worth shooting is worth shooting twice. Ammo is cheap. Life is expensive. And so I teach self-defense, right? We're in a school where self-defense is being taught. And this is something that like beginner students really have to learn because, again, this fiction of harmony, of civilization is really, really dangerous in self-defense situations because what will happen is the following. People will have some beginner knowledge of self-defense. They are going to be threatened for their life. I mean, we're talking about serious stuff, right? Somebody tries to do some serious harm to you and they actually pull something off to defend themselves, right? And so the attacker goes down, is maybe hurt. And what will people do? They'll turn around and walk away. And I had that situation in another dojo where one of the master students, he was a competitor in Taekwondo. He was really, really good. I mean, he was like, I don't want to say world class, but he was like on an elite level. And at night when he left the dojo, and Taekwondo is called dojang, but anyway, dojo, the dojo was in a very bad neighborhood in Berlin. Like, you had to go through a bunch of junkies. It was super dangerous. And he did that. He was very fit, very well trained. And one of the junkies attacked him. And so what did he do? He gave him a turnaround kick and just knocked him the fuck off his feet, right? And the junkie just broke down. And so the student then continued walking to the subway, thinking, well, this was easy, right? One kick and he went down. And what happened? The guy got back up and stabbed him with a knife from the back. When our master visited him in the hospital, you know what he said? He said, "You're a fucking idiot. How could you turn your back on him?" Right? And that's the thing. And this will sound very crass to people who are not used to this, because we're being taught in kindergarten, in sports life, not to kick somebody that's down, right? And you have to be very careful with the law because you're not allowed to overstep the boundaries of self-defense. But what he should have done is, first of all, not turn his back. That was a big mistake. But he might have needed to kick him while he was on the ground, right? And if this sounds really bad when I'm saying this is normal, because you are probably civilized. But that doesn't mean it's not right. Because you cannot give somebody that has already attacked you, that is out of his senses, the chance to come at you again with a knife. Even if he had turned around, right? He might have been able to run away. But even then, somebody that's really high on hardcore drugs, and it was heroin back at the time, who has a knife and who's willing to attack you, you're gonna be in trouble even if you're like a champion Taekwondo fighter. So if you feel the need to shoot once or to really hurt somebody, then please feel free to do it again, because it doesn't make sense to give the person a chance to come back. Don't overstep the boundaries of self-defense, of course, but it doesn't make any sense to let the person go. They've already shown you that they want to hurt you, right? And you had your lucky shot. You got them. Don't let them get up. And also, ammo is cheap. Life is expensive, right? And that's a very good point.
I mean, yeah, that's the most important thing you have, your life. So you should defend it with all you have.
Yeah, but you know what the funny thing is? So if a mom defends her child, right, she'll go into berserker mode, right? There's so many stories. You can just go on YouTube or TikTok and look for it, and you're going to see people going crazy, right? Because there's something instinctual happen. But people often won't defend themselves. And it's really funny funny isn't really the right word, but it's really strange to see how people don't do that, right? They're being aggressed somewhere, and I think everyone has seen this before, right? And then people won't do anything. First of all, they might be frozen with fear, all right? But even then, they always still try to, I think in their mind, they think, oh, well, this person isn't really going to do anything, right? We're in a civilized world, but there are a lot of people who don't give a shit about it, right?
True, absolutely true.
And at some point of time, you have to come to the conclusion that you need to fight back, right? Even if you know you'll lose, it doesn't matter, but raise the price for the other person. And so, yes, what you're saying is true. It's the most expensive thing you have, yet people often don't defend it, which is really crazy. Next one is move away from your attacker. Distance is your friend. Lateral and diagonal preferred. And now we touched on this before. Don't get into stupid fights. It's not worth it. I mean, so many people get into fights all the time. Something happens, somebody is crippled, and you're going to have to pay for them for the rest of their lives. Maybe they are dead and they just had a very bad day and too much to drink, and so then you just viciously punch them out and hurt them for the long time. They lose an eye or something like that. It's not really worth it. So what if they have called you something? What if they have embarrassed you in front of your wife or girlfriend? Most of the things, you sleep on it. It's going to hurt your ego for a while, and then it's going to be okay. try to get away. It's the best thing you can do, even if you're very well trained, even if you have a gun on you. So you shoot the guy, and then what? What happens then? Do you want to spend the next year, the next 3 years in a court battle? Do you want to go to prison and then like explain yourself and justify yourself, and then people will make up some story and say, well, it wasn't really self-defense, blah, blah, blah. It's not worth it. If you can, run away. Distance is your friend, and they are right. And the lateral diagonal preferred makes sense as well, right? If you can step offline, this is maybe a little bit too specific, but if you can step off the line of attack, this is really helpful, because then people have to readjust a little bit more. Any thoughts on that?
No, I agree.
Good. Use cover or concealment as much as possible. And I think in a military sense, this makes absolute sense, right? If you can't be seen, you can't be attacked. But I think in business, this goes as well. So it makes a lot of sense to call out your target, because it'll help your team rally around it to orient them towards it. And, sometimes you just have to make a statement. For example, if SpaceX says, well, we're going to colonize Mars, that's very helpful. However, I'm actually a big fan of sneaking up on things, because if you talk about your plans too much, then this gives other people the opportunity to, first of all, make some competitive moves against you, right? And if I say I'm going to do this, right, the competitor might do something that impedes that. But also, I think a lot of times people have unconsciously, maybe, let's say your employees, maybe unconsciously what you're trying to do doesn't quite fit their plan. They might, without even knowing it, they might slow things down, or they might not be as motivated. And, sometimes things have a tendency of not working out quite as well. I understand that this might sound a little bit crass, but this is actually my experience, that if I don't talk about my plans, they actually have a high chance of succeeding. And the more I talk about them, you're smiling right now, the more I talk about them, the less the chance that they succeed. And I'm not talking 5 percentage points. I'm talking about like 80% versus 20% or something like that. And I don't know quite what it is. It could be just like the resistance that it creates in others, or the opportunity to make competitive moves. It could also be this, I think a lot of people know this, that your brain has a difficulty of distinguishing between something you've really achieved and something you've just talked about, right? And if I say, oh, well, we're going to do this, and like it kind of feels real, and then maybe the motivation suffers a little bit. I'm not sure if that's it, but I just have to say I notice it all the time. The more I move in silence, the more successful I am.
Yeah, I think this is something in every kind of situation. If it's in business, if it's on the battlefield, or also if it's in normal relationships, I think, because people talk all the time, and they talk what they want to do, or what's in their mind, like their plans or whatever. But what really counts in the end of the day are the facts that really happen, and yeah, I think you should take it like to yourself and really think about it first, and go talk to yourself if it really makes sense, and then maybe already start doing something for it. And when you see it goes well, then you can share your thoughts or your plans, whatever. Maybe you can ask for help or about others' opinion. But if you're not even serious about starting it, then don't talk about it, because it's a waste of energy for everybody.
Totally agree. And yet still people do it all the time.
I mean, it's human.
Cool. Flank your adversary when possible. Protect yours. So protect your flank, right? And this is, again, very militarily. You don't attack where the enemy is strong, like head on. You go to where the enemy is weak. And that usually means coming from the side, hooking, circling, whatever. And the thing is, this is so obvious. Everybody's going to nod their heads. Yeah, you don't attack people head on. But if you think back into history, this is actually not what people would do in military conflicts, right? So what would happen in the old days? Well, two armies would try to meet somewhere on some plain, right? And they would maneuver and position themselves across from each other, and then, some signal would be sent, like a war drum or something, and they would clash into each other, right? And there might be a little bit flanking movement if they had cavalry and so on. But people would actually go hard on hard, right? If there was some kind of defensive tower, some defensive installation, they would go there. And over time, I want to say like somewhere in the 20th century, people actually started moving hard on soft, right? So if you think about the Blitzkrieg, for example, they didn't go into the Maginot Line in France, right? Where France has built these really huge defensive installations to keep Germany out. They went around it, why, right? Because why would you go into where somebody is already prepared to defend against you? And so, yes, people will say this is obvious. Historically speaking, this has not been the case. And frankly, I'm not sure that people actually practice this as much as they should in business and personal life. So if I look a lot at product management, at product ownership, at business strategy, people still seem to go hard on hard. They try to compete directly. They compete through price instead of being smart and, taking maybe a little bit of a detour and then coming in from the side where the competition is weak, right? Which of course takes more creativity, which is a little bit more difficult to pull off. But actually, while everyone will not and say this is obvious, people don't practice as much as they should.
Absolutely true.
Number 11. And this one is kind of juicy. Always cheat, always win. The only unfair fight is the one you lose. And this is something I have to say whenever I talk to veterans. And with veteran, I don't mean somebody that has served in the military. I've done that. For me, a veteran is somebody who has actually been in a war and come out of it. They always say something like this, right? It's not about the rules. It's not about being fair. They always stress the importance of winning, no matter how. We're not talking about war crimes here. We're talking about creative. We're talking about being more aggressive than the other person and finding the cheat codes, so to speak, to make sure that you win. Any thoughts on that? You're smiling.
Yeah, just because I think in similar fields like business-wise or wherever, everybody has a strategy. You also can, like in marketing or wherever, there are some rules or some, like a handbook, for example, what to do, how to do it, whatever. But it's obvious and it's not a secret. Some do it better and some are not that successful with their strategy. But they might also follow the same process or like the same roadmap, whatever. So then you can ask yourself in the end of the day, like, why are they so successful, or why did they win, or what happened? What did they, like, what is the difference? And I think that's exactly the point. I mean, there's strategy on both sides, but there's one team winning, and you have to find out how and why.
And I think it was also Musashi who said, if you're being fair or too fair to the enemy, you're being unfair to yourself. And I think, again, for people who might be a little bit more benevolent or just soft, whatever your standpoint is on that, I think this is really important because often, then we're not as tough on the competition as we could be, right? But what's the consequence? Well, we might have to let somebody go from the team, right? And that's a little bit tough. Or what if, can't take a vacation with your family because you've been playing it super nice with the competition, right? Is that a good strategy? Probably not, because somebody will have to pay the price. And you got to make up your mind if that's you, your family, your coworkers, or if it's the competition who probably should be losing against you, right? And again, if you put it into this black and white context of who gets to survive a fight, then it becomes much clearer, right? Well, do I want to go home or not? Well, yeah, I kind of do. But then it comes to business and people go all soft. And I was just remembering, I used to be an intern to like a really good marketing manager here in Germany. And I think he was the chief marketing officer for just before I met him. And it was really fun to work for him because I just seen a documentary on TV about him. And so what he did, and I hope I'm not botching up the story, but so in the German Bundesliga, the soccer league, the stadiums are usually rented out by some sponsors. And I think it was the trademark with the three stripes that had rented, like sponsored the whole stadium, right? And so they had the rights to display the logo everywhere. The players wore their shoes and they had their advertisement everywhere. And he was working for the one with the swoosh. And what he did was the following. So as all the fans poured into the stadium, and, this can be 50, 60,000 people in a German soccer stadium, he positioned his people at the exits of the train stations. And he gave every single attendee a little flag in the colors of the team with his company's logo on it. And so when the TV cameras went on, you couldn't see anything from the sponsor that paid a lot of money to kind of sponsor and rent out the stadium. And you could just see this ocean of flags with the competitor's logo, right? And that's not fair. That's cheating.
Definitely.
Man, I love it. That was awesome. That's really smart, right? And so we're not saying do something illegal, right? We're saying, because again, right? And maybe you can see the connecting tissue here. Cheating is not good. That's why we learn in kindergarten and school not to cheat. However, some creativity is good. You have to make sure you don't want to overstep, but in the end, you don't want to be the only person that's playing to this fiction of harmony, to civilized rules where nobody else is playing to it, and you can be a little bit creative, right? Did the guys that paid for the sponsorship of the stadium feel good? Probably not, but hey, that's fair, right? All is fair in love and war. And I think this is one of the instances where it wasn't illegal. It wasn't like morally reprehensible. It was still cheating. And I mean, I have to say, I love it. Number 12. In 10 years, nobody will remember the details of caliber, stance, or tactics. They will only remember who lived. And I think there's something to that. And you actually see it, especially as you get older, or if you study history. A lot of the things that are remembered weren't really perceived the way they are remembered now when it actually happened. So, for example, in European history, the Peace of Westphalia is like one of these watershed moments that's seen as very positive. Back then, people were saying, oh, this is, it's a compromise. It's not really good. It doesn't really solve all the problems. There's still wars going on. So, yeah, it's okay. We'll take it, but it's not very good. Right? And so time changes perception. Winners write the history. And nobody remembers the details anyway, right? And nobody remembers you anyway. And so this again is telling us, make sure you survive. Because if your company goes insolvent, it doesn't help that you always played completely fair, were never creative, were very nice to everyone. Nobody cares. In the end, the company has to survive. Not saying be an asshole. I'm not saying be a criminal. But make sure, like, it's a spectrum, right? Don't go crazy and be the criminal. But also don't go to the other extreme and be the sheep among wolves. You have to kind of balance it out. And I think this is what these rules do. They tell those that are maybe a little bit too far on the sheep spectrum to move a little bit over and to think through this, because it's true. People will not remember who stuck to the rules more or who was very nice instead of just being polite, and they're going to remember who survived. All right, getting to the last one. I see this is nothing new for you.
I just wanted to say, it's like, it's not a secret that the most weakest part of the group is always dying first. It's hard, but it's true.
Yeah. I like it. I really like this evolutionary approach. Maybe we can do an episode on that as well. And it's true, right? I mean, who gets to survive? There have been several humanoid species. Some of them don't exist anymore. Maybe we're getting getting killed out by AI pretty soon, and then there's still going to be a life form, but it's going to be a technical one, not a biological one. And yeah, in the end, it's a tough world out there, and you got to be ready. So number 13 and the last one, and as I said, there are different variations of it, but this is where we'll stop, is if you're not shooting, you should be communicating your intention to shoot. Actually, I like another one a little bit better, so I'm going to quote this as well. If you're not throwing rounds downrange, you should be communicating. And so if we unpack that, there's actually a couple of things in there. And the first one is you should always be shooting, right? This is why you're there. And that means, well, if you're a soldier, shoot downrange towards the enemy. If you're a salesperson, you should be making sales calls, right? Whatever you do, you should probably doing a lot of it. And if you're not doing it, it's probably a good idea to be communicating. Does it make sense for everyone to be communicating? No. And this is what a lot of corporations suffer from, right? They're just talking. Nobody's doing the shooting. Nobody's doing the work. And this is a real big problem. However, it doesn't mean that nobody should be communicating, because, maybe one person on the team should be communicating to make sure we're aligned with other teams. There's no friendly fire. The commander's intent is being received. And so actually, while this, again, is very obvious, I like it. And there's a reason why these things are being brought up again and again. Because in reality, you often see people not shooting, not doing what they're supposed to do, but always tending to everything else. But also, communication is important. And we see here in the military context that shooting is number one, and communication in this sentence at least is number two. And there's a reason for it, because we need the communication. As little as possible, but as much as necessary. All right. So now that you've heard them, I think you had some questions about why we would be doing this military checklist. So what do you think about this?
Honestly, I don't know. I see myself in many of these rules. I don't know. I think you can adapt it to your personal life, like we said, also to business, on the business side. But sometimes you forget stuff because you're stuck in the organization, or you're stuck in your own personal way of acting or living or whatever. So it's good to keep that back in mind, and also to overthink your strategy. Maybe you did something in the past and it was not working out, so you should sit down, think about it, why it was not working, or what failed, like what was the reason why it failed. So maybe you should rethink your doing and maybe change some strategies.
Yeah. And I think you made a good point. It's that continuum, right? For some people, this is going to be second nature. I'm going to say, well, this is nothing new. For others, it's going to be way too crass, right? Somebody's on the ground and you have to kick him again. What are they talking about? Or you shoot somebody twice, right? It's going to be way too much. But I think it helps to realize that you are on that continuum, and to try to figure out where you are. And maybe your reaction to what we've been talking about is a good indication. So if you say, well, this is nothing new, wasted my time on this episode, then maybe this is good and you're already quite far to one side of the spectrum, maybe too far, right? So that's maybe something to think about as well. But if this brought up in you feelings of, wow, this is way too crazy, what are they talking about, kicking somebody that's already down, then maybe that's a sign to reorient yourself and to see if you might not be too far to the other side of the spectrum, that you actually might need to get a little bit tougher, and that could be very beneficial to you and maybe to your family and to your company and so on as well. All right. Then I think we got it for today. Thanks everyone for watching. If you want to hear more from us, you can find us on all the platforms that have podcasts and videos. I'm signing off. My name is Gereon, and you have the last word.
Thank you. It was nice to be here. Very interesting and very important for everybody of us. So I'm excited about the next topics. See you soon. Bye.